This is TWiT.
The Game Developers Conference has been underway in San Francisco all week, and one man has braved the packed halls and crowded lines to bring us the best from the event. Russell Hawley from Android Central and Windows Central is that man, and he joins us now from his hotel room. Welcome back, Russell.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. It's awesome to get you back, man. And it looks like you've been having a lot of fun this week. Let's start with Google's attempt to change how we game with this big event unveiling Stadia earlier this week. Leo and I covered the event live as a TWiT special here. The idea of a console in the cloud sounds incredibly compelling, but Google is promising the moon, as it usually does, with Stadia. Others have tried this, and some of them have failed. Are you optimistic that Stadia can deliver this time?
There are some incredibly lofty goals here that came from that presentation, but the core technology that surrounds this, we've kind of already seen with the Project Stream demo that happened late last year, and that worked really well in a lot of different environments. I was really hesitant to dive into that at first, and through a lot of the tests that I ended up doing over the course of that time, it worked on mobile network connections, it worked in my home, it worked on a bus one time connected to a hotspot. It worked in a ton of environments. It wasn't perfect, and there were definitely some times where there was some latency issues worth discussing. But as a beta that we saw early on, it was surprisingly solid, especially compared to some of the competition for game streaming that have existed for a while now.
Yeah, yeah. And now they did leave out a lot in the announcement. Like, even though the announcement was an hour long and there was a lot crammed in there, there were some very notable omissions, and maybe that's just because it's early days, but game titles, cost, even just the sorry state of broadband in the U.S. compared to a lot of other places throughout the U.S. Or throughout the world. How concerned are you about the fact that these details were left out, or does that make a lot of sense based on the state of Stadia at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two things to keep in mind here. The first is that this was not necessarily a consumer pitch. I mean, Google obviously wanted to get the world's attention with Stadia, but this very much was a developers, we really want you to come and build games here, kind of pitch with all of the information that was dropped there. So seeing a game lineup wasn't something that I was expecting, but it's really interesting that we got, very, very little, like, only 2 or 3 games, and then a couple of developers that got put alongside, as kind of, we're happy to support this platform kind of introductions. As for the actual latency itself, there's a couple of things that are really interesting here. The first is, the national average internet connection is something like 15 megs a second, which, as you pointed out, is really not great compared to the global standard. But we saw some hard numbers from Google. They expect 4K at 60 frames per second to function on as low as a 30 meg connection, which is not great for the national average. But in a lot of places, it means that 4K gaming is something that's actually possible on what would be a relatively short jump from the average to reach within a fairly short period of time. So I think Google's actually targeting a slightly larger audience than we may anticipate with that compression algorithm that they say is kind of very proprietary to make stream work.
So you said this is for developers. Can any games that have already been developed be played on this, or does it have to be do you have to develop an entire new game first to be used on Stadia?
No, you're not going to need to develop an entirely new game. In fact, several of the games that are in demos right now are games that already exist. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was part of the launch for the beta, and in the demo areas that we have here, Doom is one of the games that's available to play, which is a fairly recent game as well. And so existing game developers are going to have tools to be able to port their existing titles up to Stadia and have it run there. But a lot of the news that we got from the conference yesterday really suggested that the best possible experience is going to come from building specifically for these users, making it clear that there are online specific tools building for those environments is going to make some kind of difference. So I'm interested to see what that actually means.
Yeah, and how that reaches into the YouTube experience for
Right.
creators or players who are casting to people who are watching. There's a lot of kind of like co-op opportunities, and all that has to kind of be coded into the game specifically for support of the Stadia platform. So you spent some time. I'm imagining you spent some time with it in the kind of in the beta stages at some point, but you definitely got some time with it there. They have some demonstration booths set up for it, also with their the Stadia branded controller, I believe. I don't know if you actually had a chance to use the controller through the experience, but what was your takeaway from having that time with the system?
Yeah, so they announced 3 different colors for the Stadia controller, very similar to kind of the Pixel color lineup in its palette, and all of them are here, but under glass cases. There is no touching them. They're not actually part of the demo stations, but in a same way that actually highlights one of the other things that Stadia is promising as a feature is you're able to kind of bring your own controller. And to that point, there are tons of different controllers in the demo stations here to choose from. Logitech, very simple PC gamepads. More complicated, very experienced, kind of pro gaming gamepads for things like PlayStation and Xbox. And there are a couple of highlight demos here that also feature the Xbox Adaptive Controller for people who have accessibility concerns that should be able to just plug right in and work with Stadia.
So
Nice.
you said you could, you tried this on a bus. What about like data caps? Like how does that work? It seems like you could pretty quickly eat up all your data by playing like one game on a bus with this.
No, you absolutely would. Yeah, this is going to be something like 20 megabytes a minute. If you're playing at 4K 60, and we know that the gameplay can scale itself down as far as 720p at 30 frames per second, which consumes way less data. But caps are still definitely going to be something that people are going to have to be aware of if they decide to play in those environments.
Yeah, absolutely.